I think good. So, I really want to talk about generosity, which again is a very unpopular topic. I think most people think like it already sounds like I know what it is. It means give a lot, and I checked it off. Whoosh, I don't need to deal with it. And the reason why I want to talk about it is because it is um, you know, the three biggest exploited topics in Buddhism are guru devotion, generosity, and then that becomes sexual exploitation. So there's financial and sexual exploitation all through also the misconstrued and distorted idea of guru devotion. So that's really why I'm picking these topics, because it's a way of me expressing how I'm fed up with the system, and I believe it's misunderstanding of the scriptures is something that was never originally meant or said, but that has come across in that manner um, to the West, and I would like to correct it. So, Guru devotion, if I can sum it up, we talked about last time, really has to do with a practice where you're training to become larger than yourself, to go beyond, to transcend the restrictions of your own personal limitations, mental limitations, and ego limitations, to break through into a larger oneness. And that stays always strictly between you, yourself, and yourself, right? So for Guru devotion, the outside is not necessary in a very ideal situation, that there is a correct basis of somebody who is truly evolved, has great qualities, can inspire you and help you to expand your mind. And if that's the case, then that's wonderful, but that doesn't mean you have to now stop thinking and act like a brainwashed sheep. That's not the point, right? You don't have to become a cult member just because somebody helped you to have a transcendental experience, right? So Buddhism was also a revolutionary movement at the time. When Buddhism came along in India, it was really a social revolutionary movement, and it was never a cult. It's maybe now, in the last centuries, more cult-like than ever before in history. I maybe don't know enough, and we maybe not have enough historical data, but we do not have to behave like we're entering a fascist totalitarian cult with the guru at the head of it. That was never the point, right? The way it was a revolutionary movement was that it was actually anti-hierarchical, saying, I am empowered myself, in myself, to become enlightened out of my own power. I need nobody else around me to get there, right? So it's totally the opposite. And now along come Western Buddhists. Oh, Buddhism is so cool. Let me just throw out democracy, critical thinking, my university education, and act totally gaga and enter with joy into a completely totalitarian system. So let me tell you, Tibetan Buddhism, most of you are Tibetan Buddhists. Tibetan Buddhism is completely hierarchical, completely feudalist. They came directly out of feudal Middle Ages in Tibet into India, where Westerners made contact with them about 50 years, 60 years ago. They are totally racist against Westerners. They think we are innately inferior. They are completely sexist, and they're completely, regionalist, clan-like. It's like they never ask, who are you on the other side? Are you intelligent? Are you motivated? Do you love the Dharma? Is your practice going well? No, it's like, are you a male from my family or my village or my valley? If yes, you go up the ladder, right? So, and if we continue to be really ridiculously naive about that, you're going to get very hurt pretty soon. So the next biggest real like crash happens when people engage into following so-called gurus or spiritual guides who abuse the message of generosity and the practice of generosity. So the Sanskrit for generosity is dana, and the Tibetan for generosity is Jimpa. That's Jimpa's name. So I wanted to talk again about where the teaching on generosity comes in the outline of all the teachings on the path to enlightenment, like I did with karma. The reason why I'm doing that is because people literally think like, oh yeah, I learned about sharing in kindergarten, so generosity, right? So if you look at the outline of the topics up to the up to enlightenment, it comes very high. It's considered a very high and advanced practice. So the introductory topics are the sources of the scriptures and the lineage of transmission, together with then usually an introduction of the specific lineage for a specific topic, which, for the Lamrim, it would be the life of Atisha and how it all came about, the greatness of the doctrine, how great these teachings are, and then this contentious topic of how to devote yourself to a spiritual friend, which that's a Tibetan for guru devotion, is a spiritual friend, which if we could truly find spiritual friends rather than gurus, that would be much better for us. And then comes considering the preciousness of the human rebirth, and then all these difficult topics. So up to there, it's just even the basis. It's not even Buddhism. Then comes lower Buddhism. It's considering birth, taking refuge, karma. And then the middle range practice, so that would be like Theravadan Buddhism, is very much onto, oh, this life is suffering and I need to escape it, right? So then comes the intermediate topic teachings, which is the suffering and the origin of suffering and how to overcome suffering in our life by understanding the causes and avoiding the karma. And then come finally the package of what's called the higher teachings. And that is where higher Buddhism starts. So the Mahayana, which is also called the Bodhisattva vehicle, right? And we'll talk about that more in a minute of what that means. But the first of the higher teachings is taking the Bodhisattva vows, and really entering the Mahayana, the greater vehicle. And then after that is the teachings on the six perfections. Generosity is the first of the six perfections. So the last of which is wisdom. And wisdom is, of course, the topic of emptiness, which is intellectually and spiritually, in terms of spiritual realization, normally thought to be the hardest to gain, the direct realization of emptiness. In reality, and I would argue, especially in this day and age, I believe that actualizing bodhicitta, really, really developing a true sense of working for the benefit of all others, is much harder, and why people stay stuck. So the context of generosity is that you're this disciple, you've gone through all of these steps, you considered how fortunate that you're reborn as a human being and not as an earthworm, and not as a human being in the Gaza Strip, but here in a very comfortable life, in peace, where we can meet and have a Dharma class and all of those things. Also, you've considered, suffering and death and all of these things. You find it, and karma, that you have to pay attention to what you're doing. And finally, you've come to the conclusion where you understand that it's not enough to just have compassion. Love is nice, love and light, the new age. Oh, everything is so amazing because everything is so nice and I love everybody. I mean, this is not bodhicitta, and not even compassion. So compassion is already very different from love and light. Compassion means means together with, passion means suffering. It's like I suffer when somebody else is suffering. It means like I can't bear if others are not doing well. Unbearable compassion for as long as that cat is lying there with open wounds and without food by the roadside. I cannot go home and be happy. I will go buy cat food, come back and take care of that cat or homeless person or whatever. And yes, I know everything about how hard it is to help a homeless person in Manhattan, because I guess we all tried. So that's, but at least you're supposed to help, at least have the willingness, at least have tried and failed. That's okay. Nobody says you have to be successful. Of course, you're not going to be successful, maybe not even most of the time, because if it was enough for somebody to be enlightened, to be successful in helping others, we all wouldn't be here, because the Buddhas would have already gotten us out of our suffering. They can't, because we haven't created the karma. We're not ready. We are not at the point where if they open the door and say, here, walk through it into liberation, we'll just sit there and say, which door? What are you talking about? We can't see it. There's this joke, I don't know if you New Yorkites heard it when I first moved to New York, and I was told there's a joke that goes, New York is a prison with open doors. Everybody gets in, but then they can't leave, or something like that. And I remember swearing to myself, I will leave no matter what. And here I am. So that's a really great metaphor for samsara, for this kind of worldly existence. It's like we're in it and the doors are open, but we're not walking through because we can't see them. I remember being a child and I heard, that there are these ghettos in Harlem. I mean, being in Germany, I had very limited ways of understanding what that meant, and that people are suffering so much. And I was always thinking, why don't they just move away? They can just move to a village where they won't get shot and raped and mugged and whatever. So that's a little bit similar, right? So it's like, can we see the off-ramps? Will we walk down those roads that we're not used to? And so we are getting inspired to compassion, to be compassionate beings, to suffer for others. And then comes this moment where we're saying, I'm taking responsibility. There is so much suffering all around me. I am personally taking responsibility to help others do better. And then there's these different considerations, like how can I be most helpful? And it's very much like thinking like, oh, everybody's lying here, bleeding to death, being injured. What's the best thing to do? And then there's this conclusion where you say to yourself, I'd better go to medical school and be a doctor because then I can stitch them back up, right? So there's a similar consideration. You look around and everybody is just in a terrible state, either with their physical lives in war zones, starving, or mentally really messed up. And you come to the point where you say to yourself, I want to be responsible for making a difference. How can I really make a difference? And then you come to the point where you realize, unless I train and I become enlightened, I really qualitatively push my mind to a completely different level. I can't help others. I can't pull them out. So the other metaphor is, for as long as I'm drowning, I can't help others who are drowning along with me. I have to get myself, not really the image, not so much the shore, but what's that called when you have the shore here and then there's like not a boat. Huh? Sorry. It's like where boats can moor, like that, where you can walk out. There's things coming out of the water, and then all the wooden pieces are like this, and you can walk out. What's that called?
Boardwalk? A dock?
A dock? Boardwalk? No, boardwalk is along the water. I mean, like sticking out on.
Oh.
This is the shore, and the water is here. Then this piece of wood that goes out like this into the water. And here it's deep. Whatever that thing is called, jetty, says Catherine. She is Mrs. Language. So it's like you get yourself out on the jetty, so the people who are drowning, you can start pulling them up onto safe ground. You can start to pull them up out of the water so they won't drown. And this is this is a serious issue, because actually I had this challenge when I was young, because I didn't like insects drowning in the lakes. We would swim in the lakes here, right? And I remember one particular time, I don't know what happened, but there were just hundreds of ladybirds in the water, and I was swimming, and they were like everywhere around me drowning. And so I'm in the water. I wasn't drowning, but I'm in the water with them. So I scoop up a few. So then I'm swimming with one hand. It's like, this isn't working very well. Plus, I can't scoop up more. So I put them on my head. I scoop up the others. I try to get as many of them on my head. They are jumping, falling back off my head. And there was this point where I'm like, this isn't working. It's like my means are not enough. So you have to, in that situation, I would have had to be somebody in a boat going around with a kind of like a scoopy thing, scooping them all up and bringing them to safety. And when you get that kind of perspective, then you say, like, I have to enter the Bodhisattva's path, which means Bodhisattva, for those of you who are not Buddhist, that means I have to become somebody who takes responsibility to lead all others to enlightenment. And I've said this before, because somehow people always say, oh, bodhicitta. So the mind of wishing to become a bodhisattva, people always say, oh, it's compassion. Well, it's not. And it's not even the same vocabulary word, neither in Sanskrit nor in Tibetan. Those are different things. So then, the question is, what the heck is the definition of bodhicitta? And then all these Western bodhisattvas have no idea. So, and then you scratch your head and say like, well, if you don't know the definition, then how can you be a bodhisattva? You know, it's like, if you don't know what tap dance is, how can you tap dance? So the definition of bodhicitta is to become enlightened as quickly as possible for the benefit of all other sentient beings. So it has two elements, and none of it says compassion. It's a form of compassion, or compassion has to be there in your heart, because otherwise, why the heck would you do it? You wouldn't do it out of selfishness. So to take upon yourself the work, the grueling, long, and arduous work of becoming enlightened, to reach full enlightenment. But why? For the benefit of all other sentient beings, in order to help them ultimately how and lead them to enlightenment yourself. So, and having then taken bodhisattva vows of inspiring and engaging bodhicitta, you're a newborn bodhisattva, and then first thing is like you're supposed to engage in the practice of the 6 perfections. And then if you don't know what they are, then that becomes another interesting point of scratch your head. Anybody knows the 6 perfections? It's like ask any Buddhist what the 10 virtuous and non-virtuous deeds are. It's like okay, never mind. It's like, I'm a Christian, 10 commandments, be good. So good, the 6 perfections. The first one is generosity. The second one, morality or ethical conduct, followed by patience, then joyful effort, which is making effort in your spiritual practice, then one that is either translated as meditation or concentration, because of course meditation is a concentrative placement upon an object of meditation. And then the last one is wisdom. And they are not in an arbitrary order, right? You can't just like scramble them around. They're again in a neat running order with I wouldn't say lowest, I would say the entry one first. You know, it's like, I was just trying to say, like, how would it be? You know, it's like, if I said to you, would you like to learn how to ski, right? And you're like, yes, I want to ski. Would you say, well, first thing I want to do, first day, like get the skis under my feet and I want to ski jump? You know, like when they go down the chute and then they fly through the air, whoosh, and come down, right? How would you feel about somebody saying, first thing I want to ski jump? This Olympic discipline. Does everybody know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Okay. But that's what people do. They're like, oh, it sounds very neat to be a Buddhist. You know, first thing I'm gonna practice wisdom. You know, it's like ski jumping. And I'm not even sure. I mean, you understand that if you just go down the slide, if you manage to even take off and not already like injure yourself in a almost lethal way, just going down the slide, you'll crash to death as you hit the floor, right? That's clear. Spiritual misunderstandings can be also leading to pretty lethal spiritual injuries. And I can tell you, I mean, Jimpa and I think we've spent the last 25 years dealing with people with the worst of spiritual injuries, and they're very nasty. I mean, I prefer broken bones because you can see them. It's much easier to treat and heal. It's like, please come see me if you have a broken leg. If you act, I mean, sorry for, I'm not addressing anybody directly here, but if you act like a complete idiot and do exactly what the scriptures say not to do, and you go straight for the highest practice without caring at all about the basics, and then you crash and you have a terrible injury, then don't be surprised if it's really hard for anybody to put you back together again. You know, it's like you just smashed every single one of your bone by assuming that the people who put all these texts of wisdom together over the last couple of thousand years were too dumb to know what they were talking about. And there's also something in us to think that we can walk into a new spiritual system. And most, I mean, honestly, having been in the scene, most Westerners walk in and they think they're just basically just underneath and 1 second before full enlightenment, right? It's like, what? I mean, it's like, I've already said one mala of Om Mani Padme Hum. When am I going to be enlightened, right? So when all the scriptures say it takes lifetimes and lifetimes, and you have to train in the basics, and it's like, I always like to say, it's like everybody understands for playing the piano that you will not say, wake up this morning and say, oh, I want to start to play the piano, and tomorrow you're going to be performing at Madison Square Garden at the level of Vladimir Horowitz. It's not going to happen, right? But people, although we understand that for tons of things, we understand that for ski jumping, for being what that's called, soloist, performing, concert pianist, that was the word I was looking for. We understand that for being, you know, whatever Michael Jordan was, is there a title for it, like the best athlete in your field or whatever. But somehow, for spirituality, it's supposed to be, if I think that I'm the smartest, coolest, and almost enlightened, therefore it's true, right? I don't know what happens to us. Then I have to question if our educational system is so great, because we're learning so much intellectual knowledge, but we can't at all apply it to spirituality. So it just goes out the window. Somehow we think like, yeah, I mean, I just spent 25 years every day giving it my all to get a PhD, but spirituality, it should just fall into my lap. What happened? Anyhow, so the scriptures say the 6 perfections are hard, and they're called perfections because they are something we have to train to perfect. And it's not going to be like you listen to what Julia says and you walk out and it's like, cool, now I perfected it, right? You're maybe not old enough to remember Nadia Comaneci. She was like a little girl from Romania, one of the ones that was trained to be like the most amazing gymnast at the age of 14, 15. Anyhow, when you watch, even I did that a while ago, it popped up on YouTube. I remember watching it as a child, and now again, the way she does the swing bar gymnast thing is just utter perfection. And she didn't get there with nothing. She trained so hard. And so you have to train that hard at perfecting generosity. So it is a higher practice that you're doing as a bodhisattva. So on the way to get enlightened, there's no way that you're going to be enlightened without being perfectly generous, totally willing to give whatever you have at all times. A little bit higher up the ladder, number 6 in the 6 perfections comes wisdom. There's also discriminating wisdom. So it doesn't mean Hitler comes along and says, oh, give me all the cash in your bank account so I can kill more people. And you're like, oh, sure, take all I have. That's not what it means, right? It doesn't mean you throw discriminating wisdom out the window, but it's an inner attitude, your training of giving everything away without hesitation, without it, that there is nothing you can possess, including inner qualities or qualities of the mind where you'll even feel like it's yours. Not even your time. You give away everything without hesitation, and there is no limit to it. It is the polar most opposite of being selfish and self-centered. If you're selfish and self-centered, you contract yourself and your mind and your heart into one little dot. Enlightenment is the opposite of a total opening and expansion. And so your relationship to so perceived material objects and possessions follow that feeling of like everything goes out and drifts out. And there's no limit to what I would or would not give. And if you've been around real spiritual masters and lamas, then you get an idea of that, because there's just nothing they feel is theirs. It's almost like, you know, whatever material objects they're just floating by, and maybe in that moment they use them for a time to write, and then it drifts away. It's just things just flow through you as a flow. And because of other higher qualities that they've trained, they don't have this tremendous need for securing themselves materially. Now, that is, and I'll get back to it later, but that's also much easier if you're part of a clergy that's secured materially, right? So if you're a Tibetan male, ordained, shaved head, red robes, I mean, you can basically show up anywhere and people will support you, and they will just give you food and shelter and sleep here and will pay your next ticket and whatnot, right? So that will never happen to me. So that's also, of course, makes it much easier for them to just sit on the throne with crossed legs and be just giving away everything very easily, right? And yet it's still something that you do it. Like, I mean, with Lama Zopa Rinpoche, for instance, sorry, I say it the Tibetan way, Lama Zopa Rinpoche of the FPMT, they couldn't sew new ropes for him as fast as he was giving his away. And there are times, I mean, it's like in the Vinaya, so in the rules of moral conduct, that a monk is not supposed to run. I mean, they have an outer robe, and underneath the monks and nuns have an underskirt, roby thing. You're not supposed to walk around in it publicly, right? And one time, the story was like Lama Zopa Rinpoche had just given his last robe away in Australia, where you can't also just like in Nepal, you could go to the corner store and say to the tailor, make me a new set of robes. That wasn't possible, of course, in Australia. And he was headed to the airport, and his attendant got upset, and he says, you have nothing to put on anymore. And he said, what's wrong? I have my underrobe. I mean, it looks like a little orangey yellow skirt, you know, goes a little bit longer than the knees. And he didn't care at all. It's like, it was like nothing in his mind. There was not even a category in his mind for how do I look? Am I properly or improperly dressed, or what are other people going to think, or do I look funny? It's like, it was just like he had clothes, because he was such a tremendous bodhisattva. The only meaning his robes had to him was how can I use them to benefit sentient beings? That means I can give them away. Better yet, I bless them and give them away. So everything he had was just like to give, 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 give. So it's to develop that kind of a spirit. And the perfection of giving means you give without expecting anything in return, right? It's like you give and you don't even think and you don't look back. So there was something similar in the New Age. Maybe you've heard about it. It's like commit random acts of kindness, right? So there was this thing, I think Oprah started it saying when there was still these toll tokens at the highway that you pay for the person behind you. You don't even know the person, who that person is, and they'll never find out you did it. You know, these kind of things. It's like you're doing it for the sake of doing it and not because you want somebody to say thank you, think you're great, so you look good, so you did the right thing, and all of those things. This is none of that has to do anything that's generosity, but not the perfection of generosity. The perfection of generosity is the polar opposite of what's a subgroup of narcissists called the charity narcissists, right? So this is like when, I shouldn't be saying that, but it's such a great example. Like when, so I have heard, I'm going blank now. What's the guy, the owner of Microsoft Word, the guy who started Microsoft
Bill Gates.
Bill Gates, thank you. So I heard that Bill Gates never gave a dime for charity, and people started to say to him, it looks bad. You better give away things, you know. So that's a good example. So he got into charity because people told him it looks bad, not because he wants to, you know, he wants to. And then he started to do this thing of where he gave away free computers to students at university. And the intention wasn't to help them to study, but to get them used to his products and not to Apple products, so they would be lifelong customers. I mean, that's really not generosity. And now he does this whole thing. He gets to be on TV saying how he's going to vaccinate every single child in Africa. But he's the biggest shareholder in the vaccine producing companies. That's called money recycling. That's not generosity, right? So, I mean, he is, for me, Bill Gates. I mean, I didn't really mean to put anybody down, but it's just such an amazing example for what it's not. So there is a saying in the corporate world, which is do good and talk a lot about it, right? Donate a microscopic amount of something and then make a huge fuss of it, right? It's absolutely not generosity. Generosity is do good, give, and don't let anybody know. And that's very, very sweet when you see people like that. For instance, Jimpa's father, before he died, he knew he was going to die, right? So he was still old style, like we know all throughout history, except now it's gotten lost in modern countries, that people were thought to feel that death is coming even before they were sick in bed. He was completely healthy. He knew he was going to die. And he went around and said bye-bye to everybody, but he wouldn't say that that's what he was doing. And so he went around, and even some of the neighbors, he took his best shoes and he just came and said, "Here, I'm giving you my shoes," you know? And they were like, "Why are you giving me your shoes?" And he's just like, "Yeah, I'm just doing it, you know?" So that was very smart. And he wasn't a Buddhist, but it was very smart because you only get the good karma for giving away your shoes while you're still alive and not when you're dead and somebody else gives them away or puts them in the garbage, right? So, and he didn't talk about it. He also didn't tell his family he was doing that. So when his children arrived for the funeral, they found out. All the neighbors said, "Oh yeah, he did this for me, and he did that for me, and he did that for me." He didn't go around saying like, "Oh, I'm going to die now. I'm going to be like the most generous person in the neighborhood." He did the good deeds and he didn't talk about. And then when he died, everybody came together and had stories about how all along his life, how he had given people gifts of money, this, that, helped them, done all kinds of amazing things, and nobody knew about it. Nobody knew about it. So that's a lot more of the perfection of generosity, of what that means, that it's a perfection. And then also why it's kind of weird that people jump over it and then, "Oh yeah, I'm generous," is because part of the internal workings and reason for the six perfections being, one after the other, is that it's understood that you need the first one to accomplish the second, the first and second to accomplish the third, and so on and so forth. So you'll never get to wisdom if you don't have generosity. Full-blown wisdom doesn't mean you can't have moments of insight of wisdom. And the way it works is that it calms the mind. So we've heard about, Zen, peace of mind. So that Zen wisdom, the peace of mind, it comes from the six perfections. Zen is part of the Mahayana Buddhist tradition. So we are in the same realm, level of teachings philosophically. And you need to have generosity to calm your mind, to have higher levels of concentration and meditative placement in deep meditation. What that means is really that if you're running around the whole time worrying about your riches and how to accumulate more worldly possessions, how are you going to sit and calmly, peacefully meditate? And let me tell you that CEOs are the worst meditation students. They're just constantly like, money here, money there. I mean, listen, I have tried, I've been hired. Somebody wanted to make me a teacher, meditation teacher for German managers, and I can say maybe anti-enthused, and I said, well, I should, I'm supposed to be a bodhisattva and try to help sentient beings. So let me see, and I forget if it was 2 or 3 meetings. I met like some of the biggest managers in Germany, and I did lead them in meditation, and you already hear my tone of voice, meditation. It's like, it was so bad because their minds were going like this. And then just even, when I talked about just the idea of doing something kind for another person, they all spaced out. They all looked at me like, it's like they didn't know what I was talking about. I'm like, oh man, I mean, how inspiring to teach people who can't even consider being kind to another sentient being, to meditate to gain wisdom. I mean, what's the result supposed to be? It's the kind of wisdom Hitler had, you know, it's like, oh, other present world leaders we don't want to mention too much, you know, it's like, yeah, you can also have the kind of killer mentality. It's like, you better do whatever selfish goal serves me, or else I'm going to kill you. I mean, if you want to call that wisdom, that's not what we call wisdom here, right? And when I try to teach these CEOs, and these were super well-educated, motivated, intelligent men, any of the slightest things I'm teaching you here now, it was a complete no-go. It didn't work at all. I had intuitively felt that I tried, I wasn't surprised, I failed, and it was just horrible. So they're still looking for people to do this. So whoever of you wants to give it a go, go right ahead. So we need to have this kind of this sweetness of compassion, saying, oh, are you suffering? And it's like, can I help you? Should I share something with you? And a lot of these rich dudes, these managers and these millionaires, they have a kind of generosity, but it's like showing off status, you know, like, I'll pay for everybody in the restaurant. I mean, at the table, right? But that's not true generosity. That is, again, it's like gaining status. So, you know, if you're concerned about gain of fame, that's worldly, right? That's not spiritual. So here, you're paying money for gain of reputation. That's not generosity, right? So you see that a lot, that rich people give a lot of money to those around them, but it's really a show of power, position, status, and that's not true generosity. Good. So I want to talk about the image that's given. So in talking about generosity, the scripture says it's like weightlifting. You don't go and try to lift the heaviest thing that Arnold Schwarzenegger lifted at the height of his bodybuilding career first. Again, you start with small weights, you build your muscles. So what that means is like, start with little things that you give where you will not feel sorry, something that is within what you can handle as generosity, right? So, because the whole point is that you give and afterwards you don't regret. And there are two kinds of regret. One could be, it's like, ooh, I wish I hadn't given that away because now I wish I had it, right? So miserliness, regret. There can be a different kind of regret where you say, oh, I wish I hadn't given that person money because they used it to buy drugs, you know, something like that. That's a different kind of, you're not regretting the act of giving. So the regret is not about generosity, but about a lack of discriminating wisdom, right? So I'm not talking about that one right now. I'm talking about where you're regretting, I wish I hadn't given that away. I wish I had kept that. And that has happened to me also for two reasons. Not so much for me, it's not so much, maybe I'm not so generous. When I give, I give. But when I see that the other person doesn't use the thing, then I can get like regretful, like, man, I didn't give this away for them not to use it ever, right? So we also have that kind of a feeling. And so sometimes I do give a gift and say, this gift has strings attached. I'm giving you this. If you use it, if you're not going to use it, I'm not going to give it to you, because I recognize this is not perfection of generosity. I'm not teaching this to you as wisdom. I'm just using it as an example for me, knowing when I have a limitation, when I can't be truly generous, when I can't give and I don't care. When I do care, I'm like, I will only give this to you if you actually use it. Otherwise, I won't, because I'll have regret. So I'm not going to give it to you, It's not the high perfection of wisdom. The perfection of wisdom, all this, the 6 perfections are actually like a cycle that feeds on itself, like the tree takes the nutrients up into the branches, makes buds and leaves and flowers that become fruit that drop the leaves and the flowers and the fruit and become nutrients and go back up. And it's a cycle. And it's a little bit like that. The 6 perfections is like, you can't really perfect, and it's not like you're going to wait for 100 lifetimes until you've perfected generosity before you move on to morality, right? You're training in them simultaneously. So you need some wisdom, which is not perfection number 6, to enrich and perfect your generosity. And you need some generosity, which is the perfection number 1, to enrich and perfect your perfection of wisdom or morality or whatever it may be. They all feed on each other. They all enhance each other. They are all related to one another. They play together. So I'm also not saying that you're a perfect giver if you give mindlessly, right? Like, you're not supposed to give children candy before bedtime after they already brushed their teeth. That's not skillful. You're not supposed to go out and buy lots of cocaine for the druggies at the central train station. So it's like, it's all supposed to be together with morality and wisdom and all of those things, and patience also. So maybe it's not the right moment to give, or the fact that you gave generously for whatever reason hasn't come to fruition yet, is not showing the effect you were hoping for, the beneficial effect to sentient beings. So it's all supposed to relate to one another. And so they say start with small objects you don't feel attached about. So for instance, they're really miserly people will not even give away things they don't use anymore, or they will not even give away things they don't want anymore, right? So start giving away the things you don't want anymore, or you're not using anymore, or you have double, right? I'm sure every Christmas, all of us get something we already have. So give away whatever you have double, and where you have no regret, like a book that you have a second copy of or something like that. And then slowly train your way up to make it harder to part with. And that's how you train until you can part with big things and you don't mind very much. That has to do with depersonalizing ownership. What I mean is, if you think you are you because you own this jacket and this shirt and this plant or whatever it is, then it's going to be a problem if you have to give it away. If your identity is based in a transcendent and spiritual reality, then none of those things matter. You're not going to feel that you are more or less by material objects or money going through your life. You will feel exactly the same whether or not your bank account is full or empty, right? Now that used to be so much easier. I will have to say that one thing that has made this kind of hell is the fact that, you know, and I have tried, in the olden days, you could just go and live in a cave or under a tree. Right now, just try to do that. I mean, they will come after you, especially in Germany, and just hunt you down for all the taxes you have to pay, all the kinds of taxes. When I did my long retreat, I was in France, and down the hillside there was actually a cave. You know, I said to Jimpa, can you imagine if we went, and this was at the edge of a little brook, and a farmer, he just had some old tractor pieces in there, right? I mean, it was completely out of the way. Nobody even wanted it. I said to him, can you imagine if we try to spend one night in this cave, you know? Anybody just sees light shining from this cave. The police will come and rip us out of here. I mean, there's just no way in this modern world you can get away without money, because somehow our reality is that we are slaves in a money machine system, and that the scriptures come from a very different reality. And to escape this in our countries, I mean, right now I'm just talking, say, Germany and the US, is almost impossible. Like here in Germany, there is no wilderness. All soil is owned. The moment you're not in your own garden, you've trespassed, and the police will show up, you know? I mean, when I was younger, you could still pitch your tent on a patch of grass. I don't think that exists anymore. Kann man noch wild campen? Ich glaube nicht mehr in Deutschland, ne? So it's gone in Germany, maybe in Scandinavia, because they still have real wilderness, you know? I mean, you can't even sleep in your own car on a public parking lot, the police will come. So the reality has really changed. We are in a very strange world compared to the one that the scriptures were from, where you could just go off onto unowned land and do your own thing outside of a monetary system, obligatory monetary system right now. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, compared to the time the scriptures were composed, we are all now slaves to our systems, and you can't escape. I mean, the moment you have a social security number, that's it, you can't escape. Because they will track you down for taxes, right? So realities have to be adapted a little bit. And at the end of this class, I want to get into a discussion of how we can adapt or transfer the old reality to our new reality, right? So good. So I think, sorry, I just want to go back to one point, to this thing of that I want to restate that the six perfections feed on one another, and that we're practicing generosity to calm down the mind. There's an analogy of how the six perfections are what calms down our mind for meditation. The sixth one, which is that our mind, before we train in the six perfections, is like a wild, muddy pond with big waves, and that's slowly calming down by us engaging in the practice of the six perfections. So it becomes so still and calm that we have very good, clear concentration and good placement. So, next point. there's a teaching story that generosity is dangerous if we pick things we can't give away without regretting. And the story that's told is that once upon a time, a bodhisattva walked down the street and met a demon. The demon said to the bodhisattva, "Give me your eyeball. I need your eyeball." And the bodhisattva, having meditated so much on selflessness, on not clinging to the self, without hesitation, just poked in his fingers into the socket and pulled the eyeball out of his socket and gave it to the demon. And the demon just wanted to see how far along in the spiritual practice the bodhisattva really was. And so he threw the eyeball on the floor and stamped on it with a foot. And in that moment, the bodhisattva regretted having given his eyeball. So now that seems pretty outrageous to us, right? It seems very outrageous to us. We would never do that because we're so attached to our eyes. But we can take that and not be so literal, but really take it. Last time I talked about that, we take this teaching story between Naropa and Tilopa too literally. Here also we become too literal. It's not talking about real demons. It's not talking about really an eyeball. It's talking about something that's so close to us that we feel like it's one of our organs. And whoever it may be in our life, that in that moment takes the role of a demon that wants something from us, that feels to us like we just gave something so treasured to us, like our eyeball, away and it got crushed in the dust. That can be your heart that you're giving to somebody in a relationship, pouring out your love, sharing everything you own, and then that being betrayed, right? It can be other things as well. In that one article I wrote about women and the Dharma, I said it's not so unlike what women go through in pregnancy, because so much can go wrong. And a pregnancy can destroy the women's inner organs. Like the baby can kick the uterus to shreds. And as the baby comes out at birth, they immediately have to take out the uterus. And then the woman has lost her inner organ and can never be pregnant again. Like that bodhisattva lost that organ and cannot see anymore on that eye. So, and I wanted to just say that we can really rejoice in saying, wow, most women I've met a lot of women like that with damage to their inner organs from pregnancy, and none but one regretted. They were all just so happy, like, oh yeah, I don't have a uterus anymore because when I was pregnant with my first, second, third child, blah, 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 blah. They're totally happy because they did it for the child and they feel zero regret. That's amazing. That is really amazing, you know? And that is why the metaphor of motherhood works so well for bodhisattvas and that kind of compassion and willingness to give, right? One mother, and she was borderline, so she had a personality disorder. She wasn't so cool about that she had lost her uterus. But that's a separate story. But it just shows you that we can take normal women as good examples for this tremendous generosity and to get to feel that we're not so far away from the idea of the demon and eyeball story. There are also so many people who are willing to give a kidney for somebody, a family member, if there's the tissue compatibility, right? or there are a lot of people who are willing to give some of their inner organs if it helps somebody, even if it's not a family member. So we can rejoice in that. If that happens in your life, though, that somebody shows up who's a demon, you've just given, you feel your heart, something that's so close to you, like an eyeball, and somebody turns against it and destroys it, don't get dismayed. Just think this is just a demon, and I shouldn't get confused over whether or not I did the right thing. I did the right thing if you use discriminating wisdom, right? To the best of my knowledge, what I did was correct, and I rejoice, and I will get the good karma, and I will get the good merit, and I will get a step closer towards enlightenment, no matter what they did. Right? Like, as a mother, and this happens, you can have a child that becomes so disturbed that even in childhood, it starts to pick up a knife, run after you, and tries to stab you. This happens. It's not, assuming in the story, your fault. It's something that happened, and try to rejoice in the fact that you gave life to one other human being. And try to make that separation and say, well, okay, this is the demon in the eyeball story here. It's regrettable, but I rejoice in the fact that I gave this human being life, took care of them, gave them milk from my breast and all the rest. So the whole point of training in generosity is to transcend the ego boundaries again, It's like mine, yours, and there are a lot of spiritual communities where they try to emphasize commonly owned goods. So we don't always feel like mine, 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 mine. It's more like belongs to all of us. We're sharing. It's commonly owned. And that can be very helpful, that kind of an experience, but we don't have that anymore in our cultures again, where everything is fiercely owned by one person only. I mean, I remember when I came to the US, I was really shocked to see that the understanding even of married couples was to separately own whatever it was. We don't have that idea in Europe. It's like the moment you marry, whatever belongs to the one belongs to the other, with maybe the exception of a cow if the one person is very possessive about their cow or something, right? Or maybe, if you're the man, okay, you're a shaver, your shaving instruments belong to you because the lady doesn't want them. She doesn't have a beard, but it's automatic. It doesn't even get discussed. You get married, whatever money belongs to the one belongs to the other. When I came to the US and everybody says like, you're sharing accounts? Why? Why don't you have separate accounts? I was like, I never heard of that in Europe, right? So we have this very, very separate. Now there's prenuptial agreements, and it's like more and more fences around property, what belongs to whom all the time. And that's kind of, we have to antidote that, at least in our minds and in our practice. So the whole point I want to make is generosity is not how much you give, but it's your state of mind. Your willingness to give, your non-attachment, not being attached to neither the thing nor the outcome. And the way we train that in Buddhism is again with preliminary practices. The main preliminary practice to limitless generosity is mandala offerings. okay, if you don't know what that is, anyhow, mandala offerings, or 100,000 mandala offerings, or else water bowl or light offerings. So that's like the training where you train limitless giving, 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 offering, offering, offering. And it's really beautiful. It gets you into the flavor of it, the experience of it. And that's, again, something you call up later in your life, in the moments when it counts, and that you can rely on in higher practices to call upon. So, and it's the reason why you repeat them so many, many, many times is that it becomes second nature, right? It's not that you have to, and like in my personal experience, I had done a lot of unconventional mandala offerings and a lot of unconventional offerings in all kinds of ways when I asked which preliminaries I should do. And to everybody's surprise, I didn't have to do mandala offerings. And that made sense to me because I personally felt that I had already trained that, but not in the traditional format, but in my own way, because I was just so wildly attracted to generosity, you know. So it's like I constructed my own situations of practicing it. And so I wasn't told that I needed that. Myself, I didn't need to do it. And everybody was very surprised. So, for instance, one of the things I did is at a time when I was really dirt poor, really, really dirt poor, and I had to watch every penny. And I was just a beginning Buddhist. I had saved some money. This may sound unimaginable, but I lived in a very simple, cold place because I didn't have money for heat. And I had like very basic, simple food. And I had put some money away that Sunday, as a special treat, I buy myself a few figs, right? Dried figs. And so I had gone to the store to buy myself the figs, and I put them in my pocket, and I walked by the ocean, you know, and I was like reviewing the Dharma in my mind. And as I was walking and contemplating the Dharma, I realized that I was really attached to the idea of the figs and special treat, and it's for me and all of that. And I realized that I didn't need that to be happy. So I'm walking by the ocean. So I took the figs, and these are like these super nice organic figs, blah, blah, blah. I had a handful. I just took them and I threw them in the ocean. And I was so happy. I'm like, wow, this is great, you know? And I think I enjoyed turning I will have to say that I threw them in the ocean. In my mind, it was an offering to all the enlightened beings, right? So I didn't just throw them away. But even if I had, would have still been a different level of practice. And I think I got more enjoyment out of making the figs an offering, and definitely better karma, than had I said, I'm eating delicious figs now, and that's a special treat, you know? So these were the kind of things I did before I asked that very high Lama which preliminaries I should specifically do at which numbers. So I didn't have to do that. I would also like a lot of other offerings I did. I tried to turn everything around me in a situation of offering. So that's a good idea to do, and it's fun. So um and you can see when you do the preliminaries, what it's telling you is to not just get stuck in the limited vision, your limited karmic appearance or vision of what you're giving right now. Like, I am giving a pencil to Laren, right? That we are supposed to always train to think, me and all sentient beings who are countless in number, giving countless pencils, and you can suddenly make this like out of pure gold with a diamond pencil lead, or you make it like amazing, or you're giving whatever huge thing, not just to Laren, but to all sentient beings and all enlightened beings and the Buddha and, whatever. So every single thing, you can make it huge in your mind. And that's the whole training. And the teaching story that is told in order to do that is the one of the ancient Indian kings who at his day, in his reign, was limitlessly rich, tremendously rich. In the old days, I guess they had treasure houses that were literally full of pieces of gold, silver, and jewels. So he had tremendous amounts of wealth. And it had come about karmically because when he was a boy in a much, much further back former life, when he was a boy, the previous Buddha, not Shakyamuni Buddha, before that was Maitreya Buddha, had come walking into his village. So him and his friends, the little boys, were playing in the mud. And when he saw that enlightened being walk into the village, he spontaneously had this wish like, wow, I wish I could make an offering to this being that's walking there and seemingly radiating with light. But he didn't have anything except the mud. So what he did is he said to his little friend, let me climb up on your shoulders. He made a cake, a mandala out of mud, climbed on his friend's shoulders, held it up to the Buddha, and he imagined so strongly he was offering a whole mandala full of gold and jewels. And that's what he offered to the Buddha. The karmic result of that was not that he became reborn as a king who was a king over a bunch of desert sand, but that he was actually a king having all the jewels and the gold and much more of it than he even imagined. And if you can include that, if next time you give to a beggar, you imagine that you're feeding all the hungry people in the world, or that you're giving as much money as they need to every single poor person in the world, or whatever it is, you just make it so large, then you create much different karma and merit, right? So this is really, you can stretch it as far as your imagination will take you, that principle. And that's why you're always multiplying everything in your mind and in your visualization and in your understanding of practice. And you also feel very different. If you in your mind think, oh, I'm here, I'm giving 50 cents to this beggar, or I'm giving one bagel to the beggar, right? Then it just feels ordinary. You just ordinarily gave a bagel to somebody. Now I want to be cynical, who doesn't even have enough teeth to bite into a bagel, which is why you should rather give a banana. If you ever talk to them, they'll tell you their teeth are so bad they need to be given soft food. Seriously. So I try to give them bananas. It feels small. But if you think that you and all other beings walk up and give a huge amount of delicious. You feel inspired and sparkly and elevated and amazing. It's just completely different. It's really nice. So I recommend that. So the problem with generosity is that it gets preached by a lot of Buddhist teachers, like in the Christian church, as generosity is good, so therefore you now give me money. That's manipulation. That's total manipulation. So Jimpa used to say, I'm going to be teaching this class on generosity and nobody can pay me for it, because he wanted to sidestep that move, right? He wanted to say, I want to say whatever I want to say about generosity and make 100% sure that none of it is connected to me manipulating you into paying me, right? And so it becomes, it's a very, very difficult situation. It's like, anyhow, I think it's very clear why it's dangerous. I don't need to find examples. So the problem is that you have all of these spiritual teachers on the throne preaching to you that you should give a lot. And the highest object of giving, according to the scripture, is what we talked about in refuge class, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So you're supposed to give to the monasteries, nunneries, and the holy people, the spiritual teachers. And that becomes inherently manipulative. It can very quickly become manipulative. And I've been told by others that there are lamas who literally say, so therefore you go and you give. I mean, this is terrible and is actually a breach of the scriptures, because for the teacher, so for me now apply the laws of right livelihood. I'm talking to you, and what I'm not allowed to do is to extort money from you by how I'm teaching the Dharma. That's against the rules, right? So that's wrong livelihood, and then I'm committing a bad karma. So I love teaching this class and I hate teaching this class because it's like having to walk a tightrope over the Grand Canyon on a stormy day or something like that. It's like, oh God. So it's not a problem in a society in which spirituality was community supported. That means people could be putting on the clothes that meant I devoted my life to religion, and therefore people would try to give them food, drink, shelter, help them, give them a ride and such. So we don't have that situation anymore. And I'm the kind of generation, I still trained in the Dharma in situations where it was said that the teachings are free. The Dharma teachings, according to the scripture, are supposed to be free to avoid this manipulation of students via teachings of generosity. And, it can be so annoying. I mean, I remember one time I had very, very little money, and there was classes I was taking, Dharma classes, and they said, okay, we can only run this Dharma class because there were a lot of handouts involved. There were actual costs. If people donate, and the rough cost per person in this class is X. So I gave exactly X because I couldn't give more than that, because that was already hard for me. And then the next time they announced my name as a big shot donor for the class. And I'm like, but I just covered my costs of my photocopies. So that's how ungenerous the others were, right? And things like that happen to me in other contexts. And there's a tradition, it's a well-known fact that I don't know for Germany, I just know for the United States that the Dharma scene is known to be super ungenerous, right? It's like you want to not even cover your costs, teach Americans. And that's what is said behind the scenes. And then the Americans complain that the Dharma teachers teach other cultures more. And it's like, well, they're more generous. And that's why a crazy yogi should go and teach in the United States, because, you know, you can wind up starving to death trying to teach Americans if it's on a voluntary basis only. So and then there's also this guilt tripping. I still have to talk to guilt tripping. One time I was so what most centers in the West do is they have a price that covers the actual cost. So you have to pay for the food and the overnight, because they have actual costs for electricities, house repair, water, heating. The food costs something, the cook costs something, although most likely the cooks are exploited. I served my term as an unpaid Dharma cook, you know. So you have to pay for that, and the rest is then by generosity, by giving. And one time, a Mahayana event I was part of was at a Vipassana center, and there was supposed to be a talk on giving. And I thought the lady was going to say, hey, you know what? The price you paid only pays for, you know, the food and your overnight. And for the whole running of the center, we're relying on donations. Please give generously. We had to listen to like 1 hour whining and guilt tripping. It was so terrible. I couldn't take it. And maybe, okay, I shouldn't say what I was just going to say, some cultural stereotyping. Anyhow, after 20 minutes, I got so angry on the inside that I said, you know what, this isn't helping my mind getting enlightened if I'm here, sitting here angrily. She had said again that the price per person was X. And I just left and wrote a check for X and threw it in the donation box, you know, because I'm like, stop guilt tripping me. If you want X, just name your price and I'll give it to you, you know, but don't guilt trip me into generosity. Has nothing to do with it, you know. So that's also something that happens in the scene. So we are at a very strange crossroads. So we are receiving these teachings from a tradition of around 3,000 years and probably more of being in a largely agricultural based and material trade, what's it called? Non-monetary trade based society. And suddenly we're in this kind of an environment. And how do we work out the Dharma is free? You always hear that traditionally the Dharma was free in Tibet, but that's actually not true. I've struggled to give words for that. It's actually more that it's community supported. So here, Christianity in Europe was community supported until someone in the Middle Ages, they started church tax. So it was taxed. So they don't have church Dharma tax in Tibet, but it's community supported. That means every event, every person attending knows and even expects of themselves to contribute. It's like potluck dinner. Everybody brings something, right, to make it happen. It's like a community event. everybody has their role, and one person's role is to teach, and it's everybody's role to make it happen, to pitch in, to contribute, right? Like an Amish barn raising or something like that. And so the way it works now also earlier, but still now in India, in the Tibetan communities, is that there are these big events hosted by a certain monastery. And then let's say it's a teaching event for 10 days. For 10 days, during office opening hours, there's a line around the block. You stand in line to slowly file through. Everybody takes their turn because they understand that's how the system works. And you make a donation for tea, right? That's how they say, because also there's free tea handed out to everybody in the teaching. But of course, it covers all the costs, right? It covers the electricity, it covers the monastery's communal taxes, it covers the food for the residents of the monastery, it covers everything. So it's like potluck dinner. It's like everybody contributes for the costs of everything. And on top of that, there are donations for the teacher. The teacher will get a donation from the monastery that's hosting the event, but then everybody also there's a second line where there's donations for the teacher. That's how it works, right? So if it's a smaller event, then you can give your offering directly to the teacher, which can be an object or something you bring, like whatever. I'm just thinking of that, so I'm going to say it, although it may be hard to imagine. So like, for instance, the Tibetan nomads come down from the high altitude pasture grounds, and they have yak butter stitched up in a piece of yak hide, right? So they donate a blob of butter, right? And that's, of course, not so favorable. You're supposed to also consider the other side. So let's say it's an old lama in the hot climate of India. What is he going to do with a blob of butter, right? It's going to make him sick. He won't be able to digest it, and it's going to melt. And how is he going to take it back home to southern India, to his monastery where he's coming from, right? So, but people sometimes do it anyways because they want that act of donating. However, usually people have understood that money is the neutral currency of energy exchange, because the person who receives it can turn it into anything they need in that moment. So that's the general understanding of money, although not long ago, 100 years in Tibet, they really would bring, the tea leaves were like in brick form, like tea bricks and milk and butter for butter tea to be handed out, or they would bring barley from the fields so everybody could have tsampa to eat while they're having teachings and stuff like that. So that is, how can I say, less the case now because economy and culture has changed. So it's truly a community supported event. And then also people will all throughout the year, as they can, make donations to whatever monastery or nunnery they feel affiliated to, whichever lama or teacher they feel affiliated to, then for the events. So it's very much like church tax, only it's not centrally imposed, or there's not it's like sliding scale. It's like you do what you can, right? And then it's up to you to be miserly or generous, right? That's completely up to you. So then within that, your practice of generosity is between you and yourself. So then you do what you want. The result will be what you practiced. So also, yet now it's very different, because unless you have Tibetan teachers, they have a place within a clerical structure, within a monastery that supports them, and everything is provided for them. That's not the case with Western teachers. They're usually out by themselves. They're like a freelance, right? And even for these other Tibetan teachers, it's not for free. The reason why they're supported is because there's an endless stream of people constantly donating to the monastery. The monasteries in Tibet used to even own land, and they had taxes imposed on the people who would farm that land, you know. And they would have to do regular teaching tours where the famous lamas would teach and give initiations on tour. That was fundraising to make sure the people at the monastery could eat. There was enough money and food. So that was definitely a done thing. So to say the Dharma is free is really, really not correct. What is true is that there's nobody at the entrance making you pay a fixed amount. That is true. And the way it has turned out, because we've taken on a teaching system that's foreign to our culture, that comes from a community in exile, is that all the money we're donating goes to those in exile and to support that community, right? Which is, I believe, the only time in world history, in religious history, where that has happened, that none of what we are giving, I shouldn't say none, very little of what we're giving goes into supporting a structure here. Means people donate and donate and donate, but that doesn't result in monasteries and nunneries built in Europe and the US for Europeans and US people. It doesn't result in them being trained in the same way as in Tibet. What happens to the people who are monks and nuns in the West is they give up very quickly because they can't survive, right? It's like, basically, you're a monk and nun in Asia, you stop working on the outside, you become trained as a teacher, and you're inside of the fold of the monastic system. You become a monk or nun in the West, they literally say to you, you say, I want to be ordained. They say, do you have enough money to live for at least 3 years? Are you independently wealthy? And it's like, no, I want to don't give my life for the Dharma. It's like, we don't care about that. That's not going to work. You need to have money. You know, it's the opposite. Whereas in Asia, it's like, oh, just come here. You know, here's your place to live. Here's your clothes. The food just automatically comes every day. And that was the end of it. So as a result, we as Western Dharma students and donors create a system that supports that we are culturally discriminated against by the Tibetans and Asians against us, to exclude ourselves from the tradition we're trying to practice, that we are funding. It's a little bit messed up, but that's the deal. I know countless Western monks and nuns. Basically, every single one of them failed, and in the end gave up their robes and their ordination, because in basically every single case, no, that's not true. I know one, maybe two cases where it was falling in love and wanting to be married, but basically in every single case, it's they can't support themselves, because the Westerners, they're standing here, they're having 100, 1,000, whatever money to give away as a donation. And it's like their own Dharma friends from their own culture are standing there and they're like, oh no, I'll give it to a Tibetan person instead, right? And it's very hard for them to stomach. It's really hard. It hurts a lot. And if you want to know why I never became a nun, is because I observed that and I said, who am I kidding? If I become a nun, then I'm suddenly, by way of definition, inferior to every single man. That's how it is in the sexist culture. I will have to be ordained by a male because there are no females giving ordination. That person can send me anywhere they want. They can say, go there and do the dishes, right? And my own people will not give me any money to do this because they prefer to give it to Tibetan nuns, right? And that is by way of how we practice generosity, that's the situation we've created. So out of that came this new outcropping of the yoga and Dharma industry with highly polished courses by Western teachers that cost a fortune. That's a perversion of everything. I mean, we're going through all the perversions. That's also not how it was supposed to be, you know? It's like, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't seem right either, right? Because that's a commercialization and a selling off of the Dharma. That's the other fault. So last time we talked about hunting the guru like a musk deer and not listening to the Dharma. This is the listening to the teaching mudra. That's why I'm doing it. You know, not listening to the teaching, thinking, which effect does it have on softening my mind and softening my ego, but just listening to which pearl of wisdom can I steal and commercialize in my next podcast? I mean, that wasn't supposed to be the point, right? And it's also, so on the exploitation of people by saying, you better be generous, otherwise you're a bad Dharma, bad Buddhist, that's totally distorted and perverted. But then saying, I'm offering a meditation retreat, Saturday, Sunday, it costs 2,000 teaching fee, not for room and board. That's perverted as well, you know. Anyhow, it's very, very, very difficult because as a teacher, you're not supposed to extort money. As I said, you're not supposed to preach, give to me, then you'll get better. You know, it's like the Protestant church, Matthias, I'm talking to you now. It's like, weißt du, die Seele zum Himmel springt, wenn der Taler in der Kasse klingt. So that's what was the verse the Catholic Church had. You know, it's like if your silver dollar rings in our cash box, your soul will jump from hell to heaven. You know, it's the same thing. It's like, you better donate a lot now, otherwise you're a bad Buddhist, and donate to the monastery, right? And I've heard these arguments given by very high geshis, you know, these are like doctors in the system, of like, why it's better to donate butter or food to the monastery than to a beggar, right? And it becomes very, very slippery because it can go down the road of extortion, bribery, lack of compassion very, very easily. The true practitioners that I have seen in the way that they give donations make no difference whether it's a beggar or the monastery. They give to everybody. They give to everybody equally. We're going back to the very basic teaching of equanimity, where all beings are the same. There is a teaching that says the highest object of generosity is the Buddha, so the teacher who is the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And I have met Tibetan Buddhists, Western Buddhists, who therefore say, oh, now I don't have to care anymore about the sick and the poor. That's completely wrong. That's also wrong. If you have been exposed to the scriptures as long as I have, from across everything, you will find out that every single point is the most important one. Right? So generosity towards the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha is the most important thing, but so is everything else. So at some point, you'll understand that everything is very important, and that fits more with the idea of all one. It's all one. So, and then also something that I see sometimes people do is that, they attend a Dharma teaching. This is very common in America, right? They attend a Dharma teaching and they donate less than it's like a Dharma teaching that is more and longer than a yoga class. And at the end, their generosity practice is to give less than a 1 hour yoga class would cost, or they would give less than a Starbucks coffee costs at the corner. And then they call that generosity, like, oh, I'm contributing out of generosity, right? That's also perverted, because giving the least amount is not generosity. If somebody gives generously, by definition, that means more than expected, right? So if you take Dharma classes with the spirit of, let me see that I can get away as cheaply as possible, what kind of a karmic result do you think you'll get from attending that Dharma class? By logic, of cause and effect, you should get a really lousy result. If you are truly poor and that's all you can give, or you can give nothing, that's okay. It's generosity is according to what you have to give. And even then, I've seen, like, one of my friends, she had no money at all. She had nothing. She had the only thing she owned were the clothes on her body. And we were in Bodh Gaya, the place where the Buddha got enlightened. And because that was the only thing she had to give, she went to this amazing Lama and said, I give you my life. She wasn't joking. She spent the rest of her life doing exactly what he said she should do whenever, and she was his assistant for the rest of that Lama's life. He passed now, right? So you always, even if you have nothing in your pocket, you always have something you can give. And I've seen her also at other Dharma events where she had nothing to give. So she would show up 2 hours earlier, said, I'm here to help. What do you want me to do? She would do the dishes, put all the chairs out, sweep the temple. She would work because she had no money to give, right? So you practice generosity with something else, right? I remember taking one really important initiation when I was very poor and I didn't have money. I couldn't give anything. I had a piece of gold jewelry that I had inherited. So I gave that to the Lama. People thought I was crazy, but I'm like, okay, I don't have cash, I have gold. So I gave a piece of gold. So it's like, ask yourself what you have. And then don't start giving me gold. I mean, this is not what I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to explain to you the spirit of it, right? So the spirit is, when your mind is miserly, it's like this inner voice that negotiates, do I really need to give that much, or could I get away with less? That's miserly. That's the voice of miserliness, right? The voice of generosity is like, sure, have it, right? So the whole point, it's about the voices in your head. Okay. Now, and like the enlightened beings see the intention in your heart. They see your heart, not what you give on the outside. It's not the absolute amount. Good. So the discussion I wanted to inspire you to have is that of what do you think would work in our community? What structure works given that, I'll just talk for America now, that the American public doesn't understand voluntary giving. So from me having been involved with the United States for, I think, 30 years now, every time we've done a fundraiser, like say we raise funds for Haiti, people there having zero access to medical thing. And then, you know, people say, I'll give acupuncture for fundraising. People give like, you know, usually an acupuncture session costs 200. Then as part of fundraising, they go get treated with acupuncture and they give $20. That's ripping off the therapist, right? Michelle used to do that. I ended up saying to her, like, look, if you want to fundraise for Haiti, why don't you just treat your normal clients at your normal price and give whatever you made at the end of the day to the Haiti clinic, because that's going to be a lot. The moment we call it donation, it shrinks down to 10% of what you would ordinarily give. I mean, that's a very odd way of thinking about donations from my European standpoint. So we've tried so many things and it's not working. What do you think would work? So, or maybe you're completely fine with there being no Americans and Westerners who make it in the system. Maybe you're completely fine with either choosing between this completely ridiculously overpriced Dharma industry, no Westerners otherwise, and then just falling all over yourself and handing everything to Tibetan lamas who may or may not be very wise or holy. What is your idea of how we can solve this? What would work? We can't hear you, Matze.
Saying what would work in terms of the mindset of Americans and making donations for teachings.
Yeah, so I mean,
Yeah.
because right now it's not sustainable.
Yeah, I've given this some thought. I'm not going to pretend that I have like the answer, but I have been thinking about this for several weeks. And I feel like a little bit embarrassed to say this on behalf of Americans, but I do think that there's so many reasons why the commercialized Dharma industry is successful, but one thing I do think that they have going for it is setting the expectation of like this is what the cost is, like upfront. I don't think that's very helpful for people internalizing this sort of spontaneous generosity or like genuine reflective generosity that you're talking about, but it makes teachings sustainable. And I remember my first Dharma center, like which was tiny, like a living room sized, you know, like a small class, and we had class every week. There would be a box and it would say suggested donation, you know, $25. And because I found it very helpful to be like, oh, this is what they think, you know what I mean, is suggested. And then people would, but nobody was monitoring it. So people put in money every week. One lady put in a check at the end of the month to cover like all of the teachings, you know what I mean, that she'd gone to. So I think that Americans need some outside expectation sort of set to them of like, you know, and I know sometimes they do this thing where they say, you know, like the 3 tier.
May I just cut you off? Did you
Yeah.
ever hear whether that worked? Roughly, people put in 25 or not. Did you ever hear that?
Well, the thing that's also not entirely sure because I think there was also a wealthy donor floating around who was giving a lot also, but the center was viable. I can say that it was totally viable. It kept going. The space was rented. The classes continued. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, sorry, and you wanted to make a different point?
Well, the one thing I sometimes see Western Dharma teachers doing is being like, here's the 3 tier thing. There's a teaching, here's the cost of the teaching. If you want to practice generosity, here's a higher thing. If you can't afford the regular, you know, thing, here's like a lower amount. And if you have any other issues, like contact us. But like I said, I mean, the last thing I'll say is based on this teaching, I see the fault in that in terms of people self-reflectively generating generosity in terms of the self, but I wonder if it makes it more sustainable for people to actually survive teaching if the expectations are set in that way.
Mm. Yeah. Mm.
I
What
don't
if,
know if it's
yeah,
helpful.
no, go ahead, Lauren.
I don't know if it's helpful, but I feel like it's connected to what Mindy's saying. I've been I haven't been practicing very long, right? But I've noticed like some of the kinds of teachings I've attended online, some of them by Western teachers, lamas, have been a lot of them are empowerments, and you might pay for the empowerment, and then there might be like I'm doing a 21-week course, right? And in that there's a set price, but there are like 300 people who have signed up for the course, you know? So I think it helps to support the teachers because they have a lot of people, a big network of people they're teaching the class to. I think this is like so beautiful because we have this very intimate teaching in this
Mm.
way.
Mm.
So I just know maybe if there's a way to also to bring more people, sometimes you get that community effect where it can support people. I don't know if that's helpful though.
Yeah, no, I'm not here to judge. I'm just trying to get people to reflect about it out loud. Any other voices?
Yes, and sorry for any train noises in the background. When I first moved to Germany, I was looking for a center, and I was really surprised to see, I think it was a local Zen center, and they were giving meditation classes, and they just had a set price. And what I've learned living here, I think, yeah, maybe the Dana model doesn't really compute to Germans. I think, um, and I haven't thought about that recently, but I'm wondering if maybe forced generosity is necessary if our cultures don't, we don't respond to the teachings the same way in terms of giving generously. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, the way it feels for me is also like if I'm always trying to be cheap on Dharma teachings and then really willing to spend a lot of money on good food, what does it say about me? You know, if I'm willing to spend twice as much on fashion than on a living being who's supposed to show me, you know, the path to enlightenment, what does that say about my interest in getting enlightened, you know? So that's how I was trained. It's like that. It's about like expressing your appreciation for the content. You know, I mean, people in the olden days, they would give, like, there's a famous Tibetan king. He gave his favorite queen as an offering to the Dharma teacher, right? So it's like, how important is it for you? So yeah, that's again something you have to answer to within your own mind, and that falls away the moment there is a set price, of course. Good. So I would just like to end it at that. There's, I mean, again, this other, yeah, I guess we talked about that. In the meantime, I've heard other people use a different word about it. The romanticization of Tibetan culture and wisdom, and this whole thing of like, why are we so much more willing to give to somebody who teaches us something if they're Tibetan than Tibetan ordained male, than if that teaching comes from a living being in a different external apparition, you know. Good. So let's leave it at that, and then we'll send out the link for the Feminine in Buddhism class for next Saturday, same time, same place, and then we'll take it from there.